Hi everybody, welcome to Hide and Supply. Today I'm going to show you how to make an Apple Watch band made out of leather. This is one of my favorite products to make. It took me a long time to get the process nailed down. So I'm going to walk you through every little step of the way. It doesn't really matter which type of equipment you have, you should be able to follow along, and hopefully the end result will be the same, where you get a beautiful Apple Watch band and you can sell it, you can gift it to somebody, just wear on your own, whatever you want to do with it. So let's get started. Here is everything you're going to need to turn this into this. So at this point we're going to be cutting the leather out, or cutting the shape out of the leather, that is. So for me personally, I'm using a laser. I'm using a Glowforge laser, and I'm going to use that to cut out that shape. It is very efficient and you can do it in large quantities. So this is something that I'm using. If you're just using an X-Acto knife, that's also just fine. A lot of people get the templates made into acrylic or clicker dies, and you can press those out or cut it out however you want to do it with the current tools that you have. But I'm going to get started with this to show you what the end result should look like. Alright, so my cutting is finished here. So if you're using a laser, it should look something like this. Of course it'll look similar if you're using another tool, and just to clarify too, it won't have the little Hide and Supply logo that's on there. I just put that on there in the template that I'm using. But generally speaking, you're going to have two sets with the template that I made. This is for the larger Apple Watch, so what most people refer to as the 42mm or 44mm one. And then this is for the smaller watch, so that's the 38mm or 40mm one. Now that does not equal the width that's at the top. That's just the Apple Watch models that these will correspond to and look best with. So you have those two sets, and then you'll just have your keepers or loops or whatever you want to call them, and these will be what holds the band in place. So you should have two sets of those each for each band that you have. Now that everything is cut, the next step would be to go ahead and work the edges, whichever way you prefer. So for me, in a laser, what I typically do is just coat the edges with some edge paint or edge coat, since it cuts it super clean to begin with. If I was using something like an X-Acto knife to cut it from a template or acrylic, what I would do in that case is use some gum tarmac and burnish the edges to make them all nice and sealed up. But either way, it is preferred that you do some sort of sealing on them, just because the fraying will get worse over time and it could scratch and stuff like that. So go ahead and work on your edges, and after that what I'm going to do is thin out these corners here, because it makes it a little hard for them to bend. So you're going to want to use some sort of skiver. I use a skiving tool that I'm about to show you, but you're going to want to thin those out, and then we're going to do the same for this if you're using the same thickness for your keepers. So if you don't have a skiving machine like this, that's totally fine. You can just use a hand skiving type of knife. But the main goal, as I was mentioned earlier, is to thin out the tops and bottoms. That way the band will fold over easily on the hardware, and it's not going to be too thick sitting on someone's wrist. So what we're going to be doing is skiving pretty much all the way down to where it folds over. So, and you can kind of just eye this later, but line up the holes and it'll be roughly, somewhere around that range. And then you'll be doing the same for the buckle end, the bottom end. And then we're going to be doing it for all the loops and keepers as well. And as you can see, it took off a pretty good chunk there. I would say it's still not halfway taken off, because you do want a good amount of material there to stitch together, but somewhere around there. And then for the keepers themselves, I just skive the entire thing so it makes it easy to fold over and it's not too thick to where the buckle or the billet end won't fit through it. And so you're just going to repeat this process with the billet end. Of course, on the billet end you just have one part that folds over. So that's all that we're going to need to do, is fold over this part instead of having a bottom part like the buckle. After everything's been skived correctly, we're going to go ahead and stitch up these loops together. And just how it sounds, they should be kind of in a loop shape. And on the very back of them, you should have two holes there. And we're going to be stitching through those two holes, go over it a few times, and we're going to tie a knot so that it all stays together. For the length of thread, you don't need a whole lot. I'd probably say about a foot should be plenty to wrap around the needles and everything. First thing you're going to want to do is, I have it kind of usually just held like this, and I go into the back of the loop, so it kind of looks like this, and then I go through the other hole, and then just kind of pull that through and make sure it's about halfway. So something like that is what it should look like. After that, I take, it doesn't really matter which side, I take one of the needles and then go through again, but go through the other side and from the front back. So I'll slide that one through. And then you're going to do the same with this side. Go to the front and slide that through. And you can do this a few times, but generally speaking, I do it 3 times, and that tends to not break over time. So, and depending on how thick your thread is, you may need to do it a few more times or fewer times. Okay, so once I've gone through both those, what I do is I flip it over. So it should, at this point, here's the front of it, here's the back of it. You should have a few loops that you've gone through already. So you can take kind of the inside needle here and slide it under that little knot that you made. So just go ahead and slide it under all that thread and pull through. And then do the same with this needle. Slide it under all those threads you did earlier. Pull through, and then just pull really tight on that, and then go ahead and cut that. And when you're done, it should have, you should still see a couple ends on there. We're gonna go ahead and burn those and hit them, but I'm gonna wait to stitch the rest of my loops all together. So if you're just doing one band, you'll just need to make one more. You wanna have 2 loops or 2 keepers per watch band. So I'm gonna go ahead and stitch these up real quick, and then I'll show you the next part. After the loops are all done, what you're gonna wanna do next is just get enough thread, and then we're gonna start stitching for the hardware up here and hardware down here, these spots. So just go ahead and cut yourself some thread, probably about 1.5 feet should be plenty. And you're gonna need to have, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, we're gonna need 4 of those. First we can start with the, what's normally called the billet end, the end without the buckle on it. And depending on what you're gonna use here, I use hardware for my Apple Watch that's removable, so it has what we call spring bars on it. So at this point, I can stitch the band without the hardware. There is hardware out there on the market that has like a solid bar going across and it's not removable. So if you have something like that, you're gonna wanna put it on first before stitching this. So it does depend on what you have, but generally speaking, most of them have some sort of removable hardware. So just double check that with whatever you're buying. So when I'm ready to stitch this, usually what I do is I come from the back and just go through on the front, and then I kind of make sure the thread is halfway between those two. Then I take my thread from the back and go through that front first hole and then just pull that through. And then do the opposite with the other side. So you're gonna grab the front thread and put it through the back hole, same hole, pull that tight. And then on the very edge, you should have a corner that has 2 loops on it, just like that. Once you have that done, you just kind of repeat the process. You go 1 hole through the back, and then take this thread on the front here. And what I like to do is just a little cross, just so I can hold both needles. Pull it out like so. You're grabbing the other needle from this back finger back here, putting that through the thread while holding this one down. So you kind of want it to get above that other thread there. And if you want to double check this before you pull this tight, you're going to grab both ends here and pull. Before you pull it tight, that top thread here should be above the bottom down here. This little loop should be above the bottom of that. And then you're going to pull that, and you're going to repeat that same process all the way till you get to the last hole. So again, through the back, grab this one, pull it, hold the thread down, pull it tight. Once again, double check, make sure this loop is on top. And that's just so you have a consistent line going across and not, you know, the thread looking all staggered and kind of messy. Once you get to the end, you should have it look pretty much like this, a straight line going across, your 2 loops on that end. And on the front, a straight line going across, the 2 loops. And we're gonna, on this corner, we're gonna make it look the same as that. So I take the back thread and needle, bring it around, and put it through that front hole. kind of make sure the thread turns into a loop on that edge there, and then pull that tight. Then take the front thread, go through the back, and then when this one's getting tight, I like to push it above the other one just so it looks nice and neat. Pull that tight, and then you're ready to go ahead and just cut the thread. And then for the buckle end, we're going to want to make this top part match. So we're doing the exact same process. So I'm not going to repeat that, but I'm going to finish this first, and I'm going to show you the steps down here because it does require an extra step for these keepers to fit in there properly. Once you've stitched up the top part of the buckle end to look the same as the billet end, you're going to want to take your keepers. It's really important that you do this first before stitching this in place because it's pretty hard to get it on there. You want to slide both keepers on it. Just bring it all the way up past the parts where you're going to stitch. So just put both keepers on it like that, and then we're going to fold this over and we're going to stitch this line first, the one towards the very end. We're going to stitch it the exact same way, all the same method as before. So start from the back, make a loop, and make your way across. Alright, so I got it stitched towards the buckle end here. Something to note as well is that it's going to be the same for the adapters up here, where if you're using a buckle that is not removable, does not have removable hardware, you actually want to stitch that in place first. I should have noted that earlier, but I actually don't use any of that. I always use buckles that I can remove the hardware later, so if I can switch the colors and stuff. But yes, if you have like a fixed buckle and it has just a solid bar all the way around it, you'll want to put that in there first before stitching this first line. But otherwise, you'll want to get this stitched, and then those two keepers that you put up there earlier, you're going to take one of them, just slide it on down, and you want to make sure it fits in between this next part that we're going to be stitching across. So it should be fixed in place there, and that will be the fixed keeper, and then this one's kind of a loose one, and that's generally how you want all your watch bands to have, one to kind of hold in place and one to adjust as needed. So I'm going to go ahead and hold this in place while stitching this next line. Alright, and that's pretty much the band. So you're just going to want to melt the thread here, and I like to hit it across with the hammer just to kind of flatten everything out. So I'm going to just go ahead and melt each one of these parts where we left the thread off. I'm going to go ahead and attach the hardware and show you kind of how it works with the Apple Watch if you're not familiar. So once you got them stitched up and everything, from this point you just want to attach any hardware that you have. And I'm just going to show you an example of what to expect if you're not familiar with watch bands. This hardware that I have is all removable hardware, so it's pretty easy to take on and off. That's why I didn't have to install it when I began with. But typically a buckle will have what's called a spring bar on it. So it looks something like that right there. And both ends of these compress, so you can just kind of pinch them with your finger, and it will fit into the buckle just pretty easily. So what I do is I take those three pieces apart. It's called the buckle tang, the buckle itself, and then just the spring bar. And you can put that little piece, the buckle tang, inside that little notch, and then you'll want to fit the spring bar through there and just make sure it goes through there by, if you pull on the buckle end here, it should basically stay attached because that bar is holding it in place. And then you just want to clip the buckle back into it. And most of these are pretty easy. You don't really have to use a tool. And you should hear it all click in place, and I just like to wiggle it a little bit, make sure it's holding on pretty strong if you're using a spring bar style like this, because they do come apart every once in a while, but it's pretty rare that happens. And then most Apple Watch hardware, there's a lot of different versions out there, so I'm just going to show you what I have. It's very similar to the buckles. So there are these adapters here, and I'll have a link to these in the description. And they come with spring bars as well. So that's one of the reasons why I like these, is they're very easy to remove and replace if you switch Apple Watch colors or anything like that. And they work the same way where they just clip in place. There are some that have kind of like brackets that you screw in place, and those are technically removable as well. So you could find some of those. And then there are some that have solid bars that go across, and that's where I was mentioning earlier, for those type that have a solid bar, you need to stitch that in place first. But if you have something that's removable, you just clip it in place just like you did with the buckle. So once you've assembled everything together, you can go ahead and test fit them on. And just to note, the front part of most adapters out there have 3 black parts on it, and the back part has a silver part in the middle. And that's kind of to show you which orientation you need to have it in order to install it properly with the Apple Watch, because it will only work one way. And so typically on the bottom of the Apple Watch, you want to have the billet end or the longer end, like so. And at the top is where you want to put the buckle end. and they should click in place just like a, you know, original Apple Watch band, and you should have something like that. Another thing to note is that, generally speaking, there's two different Apple Watch sizes. The larger version is what Apple calls either 42 millimeter, 44 millimeter, or 45 millimeter, and that just refers to the case size itself. However, the adapter size has not changed. So whenever you're getting adapters, the most important thing is to make sure it matches the width of the band that you're making. And the two bands that we made in here are meant to fit either the larger Apple Watch or the smaller one. The larger one, it goes from 24 millimeters up here, so you want to make sure your adapters are 24 millimeters in width, and it tapers down to 22 millimeters on the buckle end. And then for the smaller watch, which corresponds with the 38 millimeter or 40 millimeter or 41 millimeter watch, they're all the same as far as adapters go down here at the bottom. That watch band is the smaller one in the template, and this is 18 millimeters, or I'm sorry, it's 20 millimeters up here, and then it tapers down to 18 millimeters towards the buckle. So it's 20 millimeters up here and 18 down here. So you just want to make sure you get hardware that matches that. If you're modifying the template, you're kind of on your own for that part, but if you do get adapters, make sure they're 20 millimeter in width at the top and that the buckle itself is 18 millimeters down here at the bottom. And that'll make it fit a little bit better, because it would look a little odd having the bigger band on the smaller watch, so we like to make a match pretty good for you. And of course, there's a lot of different hardware options out there. I just put black on this one to match the other band. Obviously, that's probably not the best look for it. If you're selling these to other people, you might want to go find silver hardware that matches the case. Apple offers a bunch of different colors, so just make sure you have some that matches good for whatever you're looking for. But that's how both of your bands should look whenever you're finished, if you're making two different ones. And I think they turned out pretty great.